He is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. This is Ministry of the Badge.
Hey, welcome to Ministry of the Badge. It's another interview that I'm going to do. Hopefully you guys like these interviews that I do. Today I have on, I feel real honored to have this man. I just met him not too long ago through a common friend of ours by the name of Gary Borgendale, and he's a brother in the Lord who introduced me to Matt, and I want to welcome Matt Bostrom. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad to be with you, Brian, another new friend.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what's cool about it is you and I talked for the first time the other day on the phone. We were kind of introduced via text message from our brother Gary. And what stuck out to the both of us, and I just want to give a shout out to the Gary, how our brother in the Lord makes these connections because the Lord prompts him to. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And over the years, when I've spent time with him, Gary says, Matt, you should probably reach out to this guy. Or someone says, Gary sends me a note, be prepared. This guy might be reaching out. I'm the one that sent him. He's never been wrong.
And you know what? That's what I found cool about Gary. I had met Gary for the first time when I'm as some of you may know, I'm a chaplain for the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team. I don't speak for them at all. I'm a volunteer chaplain for them, but I met Gary when I was on a deployment up in Burnsville, Minnesota, with an unfortunate situation where two officers and a EMT had been killed in the line of duty. So that's how I met Brother Gary. And later on down the road, he introduced me to Matt. Hey, Matt, you're the president of the Center for Values-Based Initiative. Tell me what that's all about.
So what this has grown out of is I'm going to go back to 2000, the year 2000. Not 2,000 years. I'm going to go back just to 2000. But a lot of people forget that during that time, that was pre 9/11, and I was with St. Paul Police Department at that time. And like most urban departments, there were concerns about racial profiling. There's a lot that went into trying to get to the core of what was going on because the chief was popular with the community. Officers, we had higher than average trust than most other departments, but yet community members consistently said, we know that you don't think it's going on, but we feel like it is. So it's their perception. So then as a cop, what do you do with perception?
Right.
You know, we would try to combat and get people to trust us and bring in crime stats, right? We'd go to a community meeting and we'd lay it out. Here's where we were 5 years ago. Here's where we were a year ago. Crime's down, use of force is down, complaints against officers are down. And so, you know, chief wants to spike the football and leave the room. And but the reality of it was, if you looked at the faces, their arms were still crossed and they were looking at the floor. Something was wrong. There was some sort of a disconnect. And so there wasn't anything we could do to make our case as cops. And ultimately what the chief did is he sent out one of the guys from our department who he had a PhD in psychology, and he went and did some focus groups quietly did those around the city. And something prompted him to come to me with a story. He said, Matt, I've got these findings back. And I don't know, and I was training director at the time at the St. Paul Police Department. Okay. So there I am, a lieutenant or commander at that time, and the training director. And I was off the beaten track, Brian. I mean, for anybody that's a cop to go find somebody that's a couple rungs up the ladder to just pop in,
right,
that's not
right.
a normal thing for officers to do. And so my door was open, which it always was. And I remember Denny coming to the door. He peeks in, and he had actually come on the job with my dad and my uncle. He was kind of an uncle to me when I'd run into him as far as the age group goes. So here he peeks in the door. He says, "Hey Matt, do you have a second?" Now, if I was being totally honest, I shouldn't say totally honest. I try to always be totally honest. But if I would have said what was on my heart at that moment,
right,
I would have said, "Hey, can you check with me a little later? I'm up to my ears in alligators, because I was. I mean, I had a
Right.
series of things, and he just popped into the midst of that. But remembering what it would have been like for me to pop into a senior officer's office, I thought, no. I looked up. I said, "Of course I do. Come on in and sit down." And I disciplined myself to be doing that, not forgetting what it was like. We talked about this before we went on air about, hey, we're just the same guys that we were when we came on the job.
Right.
So yes, you have some extra responsibilities and perhaps a title, but ultimately, when you look in the mirror, you see the same guy.
Yep.
Well, anyway, Gary, he ends up unpacking this stuff to me, and he says, "Here's what I'm doing right now. Is the community gave me all this insight into what makes a trustworthy cop," and he listed all these character traits. And he said, "I'm up here in the training unit, and I want to start going through our files to try to see how aligned we are already with what they're asking us to do." And I looked at it, and he said, "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just didn't know who else. For some reason, I felt like I needed to share this with you." And he leaves. And I wished him well, and I thought, boy, that was really interesting.
Right.
Because there was an axiom that the community had come up with, and it was the appeal to the police department to hire for character and train for competence. That's ultimately will result in long-term and sustainable trust, mutual trust. And so they defined what character looked like. So anyway, I say all that as a huge setup to this. I guess that's part of a podcast, and you have the edit button if we go back in the show and just say, "You know what, Matt, I was falling asleep, so I had to cut some of that out." But in any case, assuming I still have your attention, what ended up happening is about 10 years after that, I had not much happened with that as far as doing any more than saying, "Hey, this seems like this could work. We should probably do something with it." Well, there was a couple successive chiefs in St. Paul. It never really got off the ground as far as how would you operationalize hire for character, train for competence.
Right.
There's a whole nother story about how I ended up running for sheriff. So at that time, I had then proceeded in rank. I'd been promoted a couple times, okay. and I'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Let me just kind of say, so this whole character piece you talked about. That comment, that meeting that Denny had in my office, I couldn't escape it. It kept coming back to me that if I authentically meant we were going to be a community policing founded organization, how could we continue to say that with a straight face if we hadn't acted on the recommendations of the community and at least determined if what they had to say would increase trust? Well, sometime later, I ended up running for sheriff successfully of Ramsey County, which is the East Metro in the Twin Cities, St. Paul. And so now I'm in that corner office, and I said, I'm in a position where I have a responsibility to try to act on what these St. Paul residents said, because I think that there's something here. So let's try to advance this in our operations and processes. And so we did. We focused on hiring for very specific character traits and continued to prepare officers so that they had the skills necessary to be effective, or deputies in this case, to do the job. I look at it as two sides of a coin. One side is when an officer or deputy is minted, they should be minted on one side, it's your character, the other side is your competence. And then therefore you have something that is valuable. That, and I'm going to go back, I use that analogy when I think about why it didn't work with the community to convey trust. When you come in and try to make your case, well, we were talking about the competency side, and they were saying that's fine, but we're wondering about the character of the department and the officers that you have. Okay, so ultimately, that's how this starts to come together, is to try to mint deputies or officers so that they reflected on both sides the character and competence the community was seeking. Well, it started to transform the organization, and we were doing, I'm doing this while we're flying the plane. I mean, I'm running we hadn't really had a plan. I'm doing it the best I can with what I have. And we started to see some pretty incredible results with the type of people that were recruiting. There was recruiting of office deputies saying, hey, you need to come work here because you're the type of person this department's looking for, and your personality, character will be valued there. And so we things just started to hum like in an organization never expected. Didn't cost more. It was always about intentionality.
Hmm.
As a result of that, so you said, where did this Center for Values come from? Well, I'm getting closer to the point.
Sure.
I wanted to research what was going on because we were seeing what people would call transformation. But I'm just one guy looking at it. And of course, if I do a study on it or I write something up, well, then people are going to say, well, of course of course it's great. You wrote it.
Right.
You're talking about yourself.
Right.
I needed
Right.
somebody independent to do this.
Right.
And I thought what we were experiencing was probably what we were practicing. There was probably a theory out there that somebody was doing some chin rubbing, for lack of a more technical term, on that maybe there's something going on here where this is really grounded in some theory. And sure enough, I found, of all places, over in England, there was a guy writing about moral alignment and what happens in communities and police departments when the officers and the community are morally aligned. Lo and behold, when you looked at his definition of moral alignment, it was character. The community's identifying features of what we would say makes good character: honesty, integrity, responsibility, respect, and so on.
It reminds me of what a lot of Sir Robert Peel had in
Yeah,
his, and it goes back to the Peelian principles that I learned in academy and that, we all know and love. It reminds me a lot of that.
Well, what you'll see as if you look at all of this and as we come together on how this flows together, yes, Peel's principles ultimately they're a product of good character and great competence. They're a product. Those are indicators that you did hire for character and you did train for competence. I make a large point of that in my thesis that I wrote at Oxford. But in any case, that's the other. So the upshot then is okay. So now I did get an opportunity to find a researcher in Oxford University. After conversing with them about what was happening, they said I got an invitation to take one of the 4 seats that they annually offer in their Center for Criminology and to earn a PhD and study this, which I did. Did the residency there for a year. I retired from the sheriff's office, went back to school, did a year residency at Oxford, and then did the field work in Los Angeles County at the sheriff's office, and then the city of Plano in North Texas. Ultimately, what came out of that was my dissertation or thesis. The Americans, we call it a dissertation. The British call it their thesis, a thesis. In any case, a massive research document. And then there was some interest in me helping departments take what we'd learned at the sheriff's office, what we learned in Los Angeles and at Plano, and could we start to implement that in in their organizations? And so I set up just a small company, a consulting firm, to come alongside and to help those chiefs that desire to move in this direction of hiring for character and training for competence.
Wow. And what's amazing is when you and I had talked off air and when we had talked, the reluctance you had, you got into policing kind of on it wasn't, I forget how you had put it, but your dad was a cop and then you eventually become a cop and you work your way through an administration, still with that mindset of, I'm still a cop. And then your reluctance to run for sheriff. And yet what I see in all of this is the Lord had set you up. He had set you up. And I look at, and as I'm listening to your story, it's even cooler. And I'm reading your bio as you're going along here. Did you at any time question when you were first given this idea by that gentleman that stopped in your doorway, and I take it there was a certain amount of time where it wasn't going anywhere. Like you had said, he kind of left it, and were you kind of wondering, okay, what was that all about? And then when this started coming into you about what the community wanted or whatever, did you know right away, hey, I'm going to do this? Or what brought you to a point where I'm going to form an organization that really centers on this?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's an incredible journey, and as you know, the Lord directs our paths through closed doors and sometimes open doors.
For
So
sure.
uh,
Yes.
when I
Yes.
left high school, I thought and I was at engineering school at the University of Technology at the
Right.
University of Minnesota.
Right.
The long story there, but ultimately the Lord gave some direction that I should take a civil service exam and gain some experience from that.
Right.
A career path in law enforcement wasn't one, although I loved cops. I'd grown up with them from the time I was 3.5 years old. I was surrounded by police officers.
Sure.
I loved them, and so um, so anyway, the idea that, oh yeah, being a cop, I could do that. I played team sports, and there was, these are funny guys and hardworking guys that service minded. I thought I can do this. But I really, in the back of my mind, I thought, well, I'll do this till the Lord has something else for me. Is it ministry, or is it something? Is it teaching? Whatever it might be. I just, it felt like that this wasn't the permanent job. But in the meantime, I will do the best I can with what the Lord's given me in the place that He's placed me. And I was over 10 years as a patrol officer in St. Paul, and I thought, well, maybe this is where the Lord is going to have me.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe I could contribute more, but ultimately that prompted me to go back to school. That maybe when I'm 45, 50, do I want to be pushing a squad car anymore? Maybe I should prepare myself
Right.
to maybe I can do some things. I had people say, hey, we like the way that you teach, we like the way that you coach.
Right.
Thought, oh, okay, maybe that's the future. So anyway, I ended up going back to school and finishing master's degree in education, and then later a doctorate in public administration, and then subsequently the work I just mentioned at Oxford. So for a guy that didn't like school and really doesn't like writing, the Lord has put me in a position where I've had to get better at those skills. But back to this point, I don't know how to fully describe, even looking back. What I knew is that when Denny came into my office and he left, he had shared an important truth with me that in my heart of hearts I knew was true, but I wasn't in a place that I could do anything about it. It was outside my my authority and my
Right.
responsibility.
Right.
So what do you do with somebody that gives you a brilliant idea, but you
Right.
can't do anything with it? And
Right.
so really
Right.
that just sat for 10 years, just sitting there dormant, but it was unsettling to me. And so I thought, okay, it won't be perfect, but let's try this at the sheriff's office and just continue with each round of hiring. Can we get better? Can we get better? Can we get better? And so let me share a story. One of the things where I said, I think after 6 years, so I retired at the halfway through my second term, and to head to Oxford. But what I found at that time is one of many departments. We were full with our recruitment. The quality of the deputies that were applying for the jobs far exceeded minimum standards. All had 4-year degrees when a 2-year bachelor's or 2 years associate's degree was required, and many of them either had masters or were working on graduate work. We weren't paying more; we were paying average. There was nothing special about incentives that we were offering. Um, and then from a diversity standpoint, you don't want to look like an occupying force. So if all things considered, if you are adequately hiring from your community, character is not male or female. Character is not for one particular ethnicity or race. It pervades all races,
Hmm.
and it pervades, and it also is part of each gender. So if we're doing it correctly, then people will come. And lo and behold, they did.
Hmm.
And our recruitment, without changing, seriously, we didn't invest anything in it.
Wow.
All we did was become intentional. And I think it was the truth of the way we were recruiting and articulated who we were looking for. And most of it began with word of mouth. I could tell it was other deputies or corrections officers saying, hey, something's different here. I love working here. You're going to be valued, and there's other people like us at this place. And lo and behold, and so I got a call from the HR director for Ramsey County, and they said, "What are you doing? Your recruitment stuff has set a new standard for the county as far as your diversity." Well, I hadn't even
Wow.
looked at those numbers. can I go back to something here? In the early days of this, I went back and talked to Denny about that because I said, Denny, what did they say about that? Because they really never brought up some sort of threshold for hiring. You need this number, you need quotas of whatever group.
Right, right, right.
And he said, did you ever ask him that question? And he said, well, I did, as a matter of fact. And what the community predicted is that we think it'll take care of itself. It's almost like capitalism and Adam Smith's invisible hand.
Yeah.
That was really what they were describing. Was they
Right.
sensed, well, I was on the receiving end of that. They were exactly right. That's what happened. And so, and then here's a couple other things that might interest you is what I noticed is over that 5-year, 6-year period is that the deputies that we had hired had reduced sick time. I mean, barely used any sick time. They were not getting injured on duty because they were keeping themselves in shape, because for them that was a character issue. How can I be good at home and good away from work? And I have to be somebody that my partners can count on me. So I need to keep, I got to stay healthy and be ready to go to work.
Absolutely.
All right. So they're not getting injured. They're not using sick time. When we looked at commendations, and these could be simple ones. Somebody sends an email or a text to the sheriff's office saying, hey, this deputy stopped by and talked to my son and just left him with an incredible impression of the sheriff's office. But when we'd retrace even those things, the majority were coming in for the people that we'd hired in the last 6 years. It doesn't mean that the other people weren't doing it, but the majority. So again, this is a smaller number of the actual, the pool of people that would have been available to make those contacts. I mean, anyway, it's kind of an exponential thing that was happening. And then I was asked, as I was preparing to leave for Oxford, the question I hadn't thought about. I thought about it, but I didn't rest on it because it didn't merit it. There wasn't anything that came to my attention. So what am I rambling about? Well, let me get to the point. I had a reporter in my office from the local news station, and he asked me the question. He said, well, Matt, this is really interesting. And he said, I'm curious, how many excessive force lawsuits have you had in the last 5-6 years with the people that you've hired? I thought, I said, I can't think of any, but I should know the answer to that question. I said, can I get back to you? He said, yeah, of course. So I got a hold of my personnel director, and I said, I asked the question. And within minutes, I'm serious, like 15 minutes, they returned and said, hey, Sheriff, I think you're going to like this report. There haven't been any excessive force lawsuits.
Wow.
And then they get to the door, and it was almost this, you can see my hands. If you know anything about kind of that military pivot, if you've ever been at a place where the honor guard does the heel toe thing, and then they do that heel and they spin the other way. All right. So he gets to the door and he does one of those things, and he says, and you might be interested in this. He said, Sheriff, we haven't had a single allegation of excessive force against anybody in this group.
Wow. Huh.
So anyway, we thought, okay, something seems to be happening here. And so ultimately that thought, all right, if this gets verified or validated in other communities, that this isn't just a Ramsey County thing, there may be a place that there's other like-minded sheriffs or chiefs that don't have time to do this on their own, but maybe somebody that could come alongside and help them implement this inside their organization. And so that's really where the idea behind the Center for Values came to be.
You have so many different nuggets in there that you had just said. It is amazing. Let me start with the first one that caught my attention. You had said when you first got into it, you were in engineering school, and then you decided you felt like you could possibly get into ministry, but then you were surrounded by cops. I say all this time, and if you notice, the name of my podcast is Ministry of the Badge. Would you say that in this values-based hiring that you have done, you have seen people that seem to have a calling into law enforcement, kind of like a minister does into the ministry itself of the gospel? Would you say that's a fair assessment of some of the people that you're seeing come into it?
And that's exactly right. That it's a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
It's one thing. So if you've ever sat on an interview panel for new, prospective new officers or corrections officers, whatever, if you're in sheriff's office, sometimes that's a couple different avenues into the organization. But in any case, the question gets asked, well, why do you want to be a cop? Why do you want to be a deputy? Whatever. All right. And the common answer, of course, is, well, I want to help people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Which, okay, not a terrible answer,
Right.
but the ones that stand out in that group are the ones that actually pause and have difficulty describing exactly what it is.
Hmm.
They'll say things like, I think it's really, and they stumble over their words.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the question was coming.
Sure.
But the reason they struggle is when you're trying to describe, I'm driven here by purpose and I can't escape it. I know that I'm supposed to pursue this and I can't fully describe what it is. And our best officers are driven that way.
Yeah.
And so implicitly trustworthy, implicitly respectful, implicitly service-minded. And that's part of what was behind it is I would ache when I would see men and women who are deserving of trust, who do everything that they can to earn it, whether anyone's looking or not, to be merely judged based on their uniform or what someone did, 10 states away from them, that a shadow is cast over them and that somehow they did something that, and you know what that's like when you work in an environment where you don't feel trusted.
Which is a majority of police departments, to tell you the truth.
Correct. Yeah. So
they always seem to hunt you as an officer, right? I mean, they
correct.
And cops feel as if though, and a friend of mine who was on the Chicago Police Department has a theory about the hunted and the helper hunter principle, and his genuine thing was, what happens in most police departments is they will take a guy who's out on the road making all kinds of arrests and hunting constantly, and they'll make that guy a supervisor, and he has nowhere else to hunt, so he hunts his own people. And I think a lot of it comes from that kind of a mentality in police departments. So yeah, I agree. And then you wind up going, you don't even trust me to do my own job. So no, I agree. Yeah. But continue. I'm sorry. It just reminded me of that because it makes
Brian,
so much sense.
It's your show, so you go ahead and you interrupt as you need to. All right, you know your audience.
Yeah.
My the old deal is that I got to be careful when I talk about this stuff. I get a little bit animated, and my wife says, you could give them the short version. I said, but honey, I am. So that just tells you I could be very long-winded on things that I think are really important, but may not be that important to the listener. But all right, so back to the story, to your point, and like anybody that's listening, think about what in an environment when you don't feel trusted. That is where you lose confidence in your ability. There's frustration. It affects you mentally. It affects you spiritually. When you know you can't earn your boss's trust, which in two cases for cops, sometimes it's their supervisor, sadly. And then second, it's many community members that they go to. They just implicitly aren't trusted. Just on their appearance, I show up and I have a patch on my shoulder that identifies me as a police officer in their community, and they don't trust me. And it may not have anything to do with, it could be some baggage, something that they saw on social media, who knows what, or they had an encounter, or maybe they never had the encounter, but somebody in their family told them about an encounter. I mean, it's all of those things. And so when you show up, well, our reaction, one, is that's unfair. Okay. They would not allow cops to behave that way.
Correct.
You can't do it. We can, but you can't.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So as a cop, here's the other part: is that's part of the job. You don't like it. I know it's part of the job. I took an oath, and I'm going to fight through. I'm going to fight through this. But when you run into a community member that does trust you, when you have a boss that trusts you implicitly, think about your work performance. Your sick time goes down. Your mistakes go down. It's interesting when we're working to not make mistakes, it's like, when we play basketball and you're on a breakaway and you got a layup, but the other team has one big guy and you can hear his tromping feet coming down after you and he's yelling and making noise and he's not anywhere close, but in your mind, you don't want him to block the ball or anything. And sure enough, you miss the bat, you miss a layup.
Absolutely.
All right. Why? Because you lost confidence, you lost trust in yourself and all of those things. The same is true in so many things. So back to this piece, that's why trust, one, I think police officers deserve our trust. And by the way, they're so hungry for it. when it comes up, and I don't know if that's happened to you, but when somebody comes up to me, and I will tell you, for the first 20 years of my career, it didn't happen. And so where someone would come up, I'm waiting at a traffic light in downtown St. Paul, and this takes me to a whole nother level. But somebody would say, "Hey, officer, thank you." And wow, you're welcome. I've never met them. They were just thanking me.
Sure.
Want to go another level where, if to be an encouragement, this was something. I'm standing at a corner waiting to go over to the courthouse and for an administrative meeting. So I'm all dazzled up, right? I'm all brassed up, right?
Right.
So how assistant chiefs and sheriffs are. So I'm standing there at the light waiting my turn. I don't cross against the light. I set a good example. Anyway, so I'm standing there. Someone comes up, and you're always aware when you're standing there, because anybody within arm's reach of us, they're all within arm's reach of a gun, right? So I'm very cautious. People forget that. They think, well, just because it's on my hip. No, anytime you're in arm's reach, we're all within arm's reach of a gun. So cops are thinking like that. So anyway, on my weak side, somebody comes up and rests their hand gently on my forearm. I thought, okay, one, I don't like to be touched. But this happened. It was gentle, and there was a gentle voice that came with it. And it was, "Officer, thank you." And I was just thinking, may I pray for you today? Whole nother level of, do I feel cared about? That was, what a gift that was. Completely unexpected. They didn't know me from anybody. It was just something that they felt like compelled to do. So I share those stories. Well, here I am, of all the people, thousands of people you run into in your life. I'm just giving you a couple that, wow, it left a lasting impression upon me. But what was that impression? One is that somebody cared. They trusted me. They saw that I had value, and what an encouragement that was for me. And so what I'm trying to do here is to say, all right, that can be experienced not with just individual officers or with community members. There's a path forward on this where we can discern how the community what values they focus on that makes a trustworthy officer, and then do true community policing, where we actually take what the community says and give it to the cops and ask them, hey, based on your knowledge and experience, what do you think about what the community says makes a trustworthy cop? And when that's over, when you put those two things together, you can define what your mission is, you can define your core values, and ultimately that drives your department. And so a mission statement isn't something that just is on the wall or on your business card, and your values just aren't the three names on the back of your squad car. These actually have a long thread of descriptors with them. So I'll just give you three, and this is going to be something that you'll see the pattern right away. But let's just pick words like the community would say. They don't use the term honesty very often, but they do use the word, they don't use the word integrity very often, but they use attributes of it a lot when they talk about trustworthy officers. Overwhelmingly, honesty is what comes up, that word, okay? Another thing, they talk about caring about other people and people, being helpful to other people, and regardless of what they look like and their circumstances. And that's about respect. That's what they're talking about. And then ultimately, they do want competence. They want service-minded people that know how to keep themselves safe and keep their community safe. And service. So there's three things: see, respect, and service. That's the community's terms. Now, cops, we'd say integrity, honor, and service or something like that. That would be ours. Or professionalism. That's another one. Well, the community doesn't understand. They're not going to understand honor, integrity, and professionalism. We do inside the organization. The community is like, I don't know what that is. In fact, they've told me, sounds like you're talking about the Army. Well, okay. So that's not what we're looking for. Anyway, so the point is, once you come down to those three things, now, here's the part, as I've talked about this in the past, and I've gotten in the weeds a bit, but if I really drill down on what the consensus is around honesty, respect, and service, Brian, can we map those to what character looks like in the Bible?
Absolutely.
And actually, who is the model of demonstrating
Jesus himself.
service,
Yes.
who was the model for,
Yes.
respect,
Yes.
respecting others wherever he went,
Yes.
and being the absolute model for honesty. So
Yes.
I say, well, hey, I guess that's all that it takes to be a trustworthy cop is to be Christ.
Absolutely. And
Not too high a bar, right?
here's the thing, Matt. The one thing I picked up on, and I'll get into what I find to be the perverseness of all what you're saying too, because I think we always hear about community policing. We always hear about these things, and the most ridiculous stuff happens on police departments. But I'll get back to that. Yes, Christ-centered values. And there's a story in the Bible, and I did a whole episode on this, about the centurion that comes to Jesus. And the interesting part about the centurion that comes to Jesus is those people come to Jesus vouching for the centurion. And what are they pointing out? The things that the centurion did for their community. This guy helped us build our temple. He does this for us. He does that for us. And he vouches to Jesus. And the centurion is this humble guy, yet with a lot of power, who comes to Jesus and says, look, like you, I can tell people to go here and go there, and they just do it. But what I recognize is you're a higher authority than me. And therefore, all you have to do is give a word and say. And what I find to be striking about this, and what really hit me to start Ministry of the Badge, was Christ looked at everybody else around him, and it says, never have I seen, and I'll paraphrase him, anyone with character or faith like this man. And that's what it is. It's those principles. It's the Roman 13 principle of knowing exactly who you are and what you're called to do as a police officer comes from God, that higher authority. And to have that high of esteem for the community, for yourself, to want to serve as Christ did, absolutely, I believe that should be centered. And I love the fact that you alluded to that. And I was thinking of that, of course, right off the bat. But isn't that amazing, though? Even the Bible has a story of what I think a model cop should be in that centurion. And that's exactly what you're doing in this, is putting that forward. Now, you and I, when did you retire?
My last day at the sheriff's office was January 2017.
Okay,
So
so
I'm careful with the word I use, retire, because
well,
when I
left the
retired as
police.
sheriff was 2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was I'd gotten hired in as a CSO and a community service officer in 81, and then became a cop in November of 82. I
Okay.
just turned 21 at the time, so everybody can do the math here. It's my age. So I just had turned 21. Anyway, and then so by the time I was finishing up at the sheriff's office, I was really close to over 35 years in. Officially, that doesn't include the community service officer time. So I just hit 55 at that time.
So you saw
Yeah.
the ebbs and flows. I'm sure you've heard about the pendulum swings in policing. You know, I remember I had one boss probably around about your age, got hired right around this, probably a little bit later than you. But he used to tell me, don't worry. They call me Gonzo. Don't worry about it, Gonzo. You know, it'll come back around. It'll come back around. 2,000 hits. The towers, they fall. We're the greatest heroes on earth, right? Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service, which comes from the military guys. My dad was a Vietnam vet. Those guys really pushed hard for the military to get the respect they have now. So cops got to taste a little bit of that, right? We were all heroes. People loved us for a while, and then went right back. Then a couple different incidences out in California, and of course up by you, down in Missouri. All these things shift gears. All of a sudden, you're like, oh boy. The overreaction to that, especially in certain communities, seems to be a perverse sense of what you accomplished by simply asking the community what they want. And what I mean by that is, I see cops now that are quote unquote community police officers. They're in dance contests and eating contests, and they're in uniform, and we look like a joke. Like, what is happening to policing in that you believe that your officer is going to get in a dance contest in the middle of the neighborhood and do whatever because you think this is a way to reach the community, and there is no sense that the officer has any type of authority. He's just some joker that's out there wearing a uniform, being just like everyone else. Wouldn't you say that's the perverse of what it is that you're trying to do?
So let me put my researcher's hat on for a minute. There isn't any empirical evidence that shows that any of that ever increases trust. Zero. It could get a lot of views. So let's think about this for a second, Brian. Ask yourself, how long did it take for you to trust me, or at least start to grant me some trust? Now, we started out in a good place because there was a guy that we mutually trust that gave us a handshake. But through that phone call conversation and our knowledge and experience and spirit, we had some discernment, and we said, okay, I think I can trust this guy, and he wants me to go into in a couple of days, he wants me to go on a podcast with him. Well, that's pretty intimate. So,
Right.
but this is rare, right?
Right.
So think about officers. You get one-off, two-off type of opportunities to interact with people. Usually, when it's there to help them pick up the pieces of whatever terrible thing has happened in their life, traffic accident, domestic situation, stolen property, whatever it is. And they're so focused on the trauma, whatever, that they might remember something about you. They don't necessarily remember your face or your name. They remember how they felt while you were there. Were you a calming influence, and did you seem interested? The good news with that is it pays it forward to the next officers.
Absolutely.
But the reality of it is that I write about this in my thesis about, we do National Night Out. We do Coffee with a Cop. We do Shop with a Cop, Santa Cop, all the different things. By the way, keep doing them. I don't have a problem with that. But I think there isn't anything out there that says that generates trust. Okay? There isn't. It doesn't hurt it. Okay? And the reason is that think about how we learn to trust someone else from our earliest age. It depends. It depends on the encounter. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on who's there. And in time, we start to trust people. So the idea that a one-off or doing something silly is going to generate trust, it could generate a conversation that long-term could turn into something. But in general, one-offs never do that. In any case, doesn't matter if you're a cop or anything else. And so when I see the types of things that you're talking about, one is, people want to know that we're competent people. They want us to know that we're human, but they also know, if you got somebody that's all tacked up, and they're wearing their SWAT gear, or a SEAL team member standing on a corner and they start bouncing around like that, does that give you warm and fuzzies, or does it make you wonder what's going on? Looks like they're ready for game time, but their head's not in the game.
Correct.
To me, that's what it appears like. So,
well, you have officers making TikTok videos in their squad cars doing the most ridiculous thing. And some of these chiefs of police, they and sheriffs encourage this kind of thing. Yeah. And you're like, do you have any idea? You're taking away from the integrity of officers altogether. And it's a wonder no one wants to do the job anymore, because we just look like clowns. It's a clown show. It's ridiculous.
So now that you mention that, how many times somebody said we really like when officers do silly things, and that makes a trustworthy cop?
How many? Yeah, exactly.
From Los Angeles to Texas to the statewide in Minnesota.
Exactly.
Never has anyone ever said that.
Yep.
Zero. Okay.
Wow.
Because the question that I ask to kick off my meetings, my focus group meetings with community members, is to increase the level of trust. Let's say the Kenosha Police Department. What type of people should we hire? I don't talk about character. I don't talk about anything, and then I just let them go. And in every single case, their answers ultimately coalesce around three big things: honesty, respect, and service. Now, how they talk about it, how they emphasize elements and attributes of those things might be a little bit different. But so let's say somebody invited me to say, hey, Kenosha, we should do this over here. We should do this in Milwaukee. Whatever, pick whatever community you want.
Right.
All right. So, and I show up. Well, I'm not going to go in the room and I don't tell anybody what anybody else has said, because it doesn't matter. What matters is to you and your community, what are the attributes of officers that when they behave in these ways, they implicitly radiate trust.
The one thing
and let them talk.
The one thing I read in on your website was you found that it was across the board. I mean, no matter what community, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was communities from all over the United States, if I'm not mistaken, that you had
Yes.
taken
Yeah.
more or less these surveys came. So it seems
Yeah.
every community had those same three in some form or the other, had those same
Yeah.
three attributes that they wanted.
Hmm. Yep.
Did you
Yep.
find it in the certain neighborhoods as well with the different ethnicities? Did it matter what ethnicity you crossed? You know, I'm not a person probably like you. I see human beings. I don't necessarily colors and whatever else,
Mhm.
but there is ethnicity. You have differences. I come from a Hispanic slash Irish background. So I have that side of me and various things. But did you find it different in the different communities, or was it the same across the board?
Okay. It's fun for me. So thanks for letting me answer this question. It's
Absolutely.
because I didn't know what to expect.
Mhm.
So I'm a cop. So let me just tell two stories.
Okay.
Okay. Who know? I'm not going to say it's the last two, but let me just do two.
Okay.
So when I was out in Los Angeles County, and I think a lot of people don't realize how large Los Angeles County is. It's over 3,000 square miles,
Wow.
one county,
Wow.
between 10 and 11 million people. The sheriff's office has at any given time 18,000 sworn. That's sworn, so that's not just staff, that's sworn.
Right.
It's huge. It's a massive place.
That's huge.
So, all right. So, well, I take that back. Is it? Yeah, it's over 18. It's 18 to 20,000. And here's the deal: is there's more deputies than LA deputies than there are LA cops.
Wow.
All right. Yeah, people don't realize just how
No,
big that
no. What
sheriff's office
LAPD
is.
gets all the press, right?
Oh yeah, but
All the
that's why
TV
you
shows
see.
are LAPD.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, okay, so, but in the end, some of the unincorporated cities or incorporated cities, they contract with the sheriff's office.
Sure.
Let me
Yeah,
give you
makes sense.
one. Compton. One of
Ah,
my focus
yes.
groups was the sheriff set it up saying, hey, let's make sure we go all over our county. So one of the ones he chose was to go down to Compton.
Hmm.
That was the only focus group that was not diverse.
Hmm.
I was the only Caucasian.
Wow.
Probably nearly. I don't know if there were any in the building. And there were hundreds of people working in and out of that. It's a big office. It's like a separate police department.
Hmm.
And then the people that were part of the focus group were all African American, as it turned out.
Hmm.
They came from different backgrounds. They had different responsibilities or things that they were doing in the community. I say all that in this group, there was one guy that was sitting in there, and if you've ever been in meetings and you get this, that either means they're thinking or they're completely like, I can't wait to get out of here. I don't believe a word he's saying and all that. So we're 10 to 15 minutes into a conversation, and it's a small group. It's a focus group. He's the one that hadn't talked. I'm like, well, then there came a moment where he does this. He lifts his hands from this and goes to this. All right. And I thought,
Right.
okay. And here's what he said. He says, as I'm looking and listening to all of the responses and the answers that we're putting up, because I would put up everybody's answers so they could see what everybody was saying in real time.
How many people?
And a focus group is going to run, if you do it right, you should hit no less than 6. You shouldn't have more than 12.
Okay.
That's the objective. But you do it over and over until you say, all right, answers are now coalescing. We could ask, it's like surveys. Do you do 500 people? Do you do 1,000 or 3,000? There's a limit as to how much any answers will change. So I wasn't trying to get all the answers. I was trying to get 95%. And the way to get 95% is once they start to repeat, then you hit your mark. So in this particular case, I think this was a smaller one. I think there was only 6 or 7 there. But in any case, this guy gets to this point and he's listening to the answers. He says, what we're really talking about here and what makes a trustworthy cop? He says it's servant leadership. Servant leadership is what we're talking about here. And then he starts to unpack that, and the rest of the group starts to participate in that conversation. They start talking about attributes, and then they think about deputies that they had encountered that behaved in that way. And so the idea there is so you talk about a diverse response. All right, that isn't. Servant leadership came up in faith groups. It came up in business sector meetings that I had. It came up in community crime prevention groups. Like you have people that participate in how, different house watch and crime prevention, neighborhood
Hmm.
watch
Hmm.
programs, and
Hmm.
so on. All right. Now let me go another place. Somebody say, well, what about youth, troubled youth? And one of the folks that had been in the sheriff's office when I was there, she offered to lead when she heard what was going on. She said, I'd really like to take a run, and would you mind if I helped with recruitment? And she just absolutely said, this is exactly what we need to do. Now she's African American, um, which I'll set that over there, but we had asked about what about diversity? Well, she self-deployed to this and said, this is the future. Well, since that time, she climbed the ranks at the sheriff's office, and she's been the director of uh, county corrections, youth corrections in one of the suburban, one of the five county metro area, and that comprises Twin Cities. I guess it's 7 counties now, but anyway, one of the major counties just south of St. Paul in Minneapolis. And while she's been in that role, she thought, I'm going to ask these kids what makes a trustworthy officer, what makes a trustworthy social worker, what makes a trustworthy teacher. So they go into the detention center and ask those kids. Brian,
Wow.
guess what the answers were?
Hmm.
Honesty, respect, and a willing to help.
Wow.
What's that? Service.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so, so this is, what that tells me is that this is a universal truth. This
Yeah.
is ingrained into who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our
Very
Creator
interesting.
made us be drawn toward this,
Yes.
and that regardless of where you come from and regardless of what your age is, we're drawn toward people. So try to think of a time that you haven't been drawn to someone that you thought was implicitly honest,
Yeah.
implicitly respectful, and implicitly service-minded. Not a business doctor. Because I've talked about this, and there's some healthcare people that are like, we need to get this in our organization. We need these kind of people, or somebody at a church saying, this is exactly the type of staff we need to be hiring. Anyway. So I try to stay in my lane, but the reality of it is where don't you want people that are implicitly honest, respectful, and service-minded? So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
That is amazing, and it brings me back to conversations that I used to have with guys on the street, and you have some very interesting conversations with guys on the street, and the one thing that always stood out that I guess to toot my own horn is, Gonzo, the one thing about you is you're just straight, man. You're just straight. You're a straight shooter. You don't lie. You don't try to BS us, not to use any colorful words, but you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying. And it was important to them. And I remember learning from good officers. Don't go lie to people. There's no sense in it. There's no sense in lying. These people will read right through you because out on the street it's raw, man. You lie to somebody out there, you've lost all integrity. And so many officers overcompensate because, quite frankly, I think a lot of them shouldn't be in this position who do these kind of things. They overcompensate with their ability to be able to throw somebody on the ground or throw cuffs or throw fists right away. And those are the cops who probably shouldn't even be where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
and if they would just be integral, and they themselves
Mm-hmm.
don't have any integrity, therefore the people on the street see this, but they have the badge, and suddenly now it's the guy who was picked on in high school or whatever, right? That stereotypical person that these people on the
Mm-hmm.
street think they are,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact it's just they have no integrity. And it sounds
Mm-hmm.
now. Let me ask you, when you started hiring on the sheriff's department, when you had full control of this, would you see a large difference between the ones that you hired and then the ones that were already there? And to add part two to that, did the ones that were already there commingle or pick up on, or did they kind of join in with those other guys? How did that work out?
Yeah. So now we're getting great question. Because here's what because we did this as an on-ramp, not a big cannonball,
Mm-hmm.
right? The language I started to use, here's the deal: as a leader, people are going to mock you anyway, right? So I might as well pick what they're going to say. Well, there he goes again. There he goes
Sure.
again, talking about those values.
Sure.
Well, you know what? If that's, they're going to say something. So I thought, well,
Right.
so no matter where I went, I talked about our same purpose for why we exist, what our mission was, and the way that we were going to accomplish our mission was through these values. And so for, let's say, 80% of the staff that were there, they're like, that is exactly the clarity. Finally, that's why I got on the job. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, for the other, let's say 20%, now these are just arbitrary 80-20 rule
Right.
type of
Right.
things.
Yeah.
So let's say that there's 20% that you'd say, well, they rounded up when they hired that guy, right? That you're like, oh, you know, if we didn't have so many vacancies, we wouldn't have taken whoever it is, right?
Right.
I have a much longer story about why you should never do that, but anyway, but back staying on point. I always would want people to be honest, be respectful, be service minded, because it's the right thing to do, and you do it altruistically, right? But as a boss, I thought, as long as they have the behaviors that the community believes are honest, respectful, and service minded, even if maybe they're not, when they, in their private life in some way, they cut corners and whatever it is that they're doing. But when they are working, at least to the public and at least to their coworkers, they're always being honest, respectful, and service minded. So I thought and hopefully they would come along. But at the same time, there comes a point where, the sheriff's not fooling around. This is real. And I've told people, I said, if you don't like this, I don't, I actually use this more than once. I said, I know for some of you this might make you feel uncomfortable, and I just want you to take a look in the back of the room. I said, we don't have anybody standing by. We didn't ask you to check your guns. There's no one, I don't have a SWAT member there guarding the door. This is not a hostage situation. If you don't like it, it's okay. But there are other departments that are looking for staff. And if you feel like this isn't something that you can support, I'm not going to hinder you, but I also don't want you to suffer through being at an organization that is inconsistent with what you think that policing looks like in this community. And one of the other things that's important, I think, in this is just, you should see what happens when you respect cops, meaning as a boss. So another example I use is this, that lots of chiefs and sheriffs, let's say some bad issue happened, right? So what do? Oh, we have to have a town hall meeting. So the mayor comes, the commissioner, council members, the police chief is there, the sheriff is there, they're sitting at the table up front, right? And then people take turns stepping up to the open microphone, they blow everybody's hair back, and then they go sit in the back row with their arms crossed. All right, well, okay, was that useful? In the meantime, the people up front are taking notes, right? Because they're listening to what they said and they want to do it, because this is community policing. You have to deal with them off-gassing, whatever it is they're upset about.
Right.
But here's why I know those don't work. Because all I have to do is, when that's over, you look in the parking lot and those people are still complaining out in the parking lot. They thought they would feel better.
Yeah.
And it didn't make them feel better. And so they're still upset. So, and then here's the other part: as a responsible chief or sheriff, how do I get back to that person to let them know, number one, I heard you. Number two, we're working on it. And here's the progress that we're making. You can't.
No.
So I say, what was the point of that meeting?
Right.
It was, so going about things the way that it's evolved for me is that, one, if we're truly doing community policing, we have to do both sides of that. One is, yes, you listen implicitly to the community, not in one-offs, but ask an important question, not a bunch, just one. Get their input from several different communities. And then if there's general coalescence around specific ideas, you have enough to go forward. Now you take those ideas and you go to your officers and do the same thing. You talk to the street cops, you talk to investigators, and you talk to management separately, managers with managers, because I don't want, Norman New Guy there with a senior manager. They're not going to say anything, right? So you put the street officers with the street officers. You know what happens? One, they're shocked that you asked for their opinion. And the other positive thing is they'd say, boss, you know what? As much as I hate to say it, they're right about that. It is an issue. And here's what I'm thinking. Or they're saying, well, boss, here's the rest of the story. Here's what the community's not telling you. What does that feel like when you're an officer and your boss actually asks you based on your knowledge and experience, how would you address this problem? Here's what the community says. What do you think? Instead, here's
I
the
couldn't
worst
tell
thing
you.
that we do. Yeah, exactly, because you haven't experienced it. Here's
Correct.
more often what happens: the chief or the sheriff goes to that community meeting. They, as I said, they get their hair blown back by people stepping up to the microphone
Yeah.
and expressing themselves. And then what do? They go into the roll call room and they say, okay, I just came from this town hall meeting and people are upset about this, this, and this, and I need you guys to get started on this tomorrow. They said this, we're going to do this. I promised them this. And so you get out there and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in their world, they leave that meeting and in their heart of hearts, they're thinking, yeah, I know how to do community policing.
Yep.
I'm like, oh man,
Yep.
you only did half of it. You listened at one meeting. And then you come back and then you blast your staff. And then, by the way, your expectation is that your staff are going to go out and always listen to the community first too and get their input. and then make sure they run their ideas past their boss.
Yeah.
That's what you expect, but you don't model it. Anyway, it's part of police culture. I'm hoping that in the midst of what I'm doing, if there's even another thing, not just in this area of hire for character, but just this whole idea of truly practicing community policing, where yes, we listen to the community. We don't just do a simple survey. We do something legitimate. And by the way, we get back to them with progress reports. Invite them to face-to-face meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they don't come, but don't just send out an email saying we're working on it. Invite them. And sometimes they'll come, sometimes they won't for a briefing, but at the same time, they know they could have. What does that say? Transparency, honesty. But anyway, so those are some things that are also organizational elements that come out of this.
So it did seem, though, to get back to one of my points was, so those officers, the 20%, did they adhere to the 80% that you had hired? So it just became infectious for lack of a better word, throughout the police department and even those old timers, because the old timers, I mean, I was one, right? The salty dogs, right? Who've been around a while, who've been under the past administration, who just they have no interest. And I talk to a lot of guys like that. I've been out of policing now for the last 4 years going on, and those salty dogs, man, they, like I said, I was one. What did it for me, the switch, was it was actually the Lord who humbled me one time to tell me to apologize to a boss who did not deserve an apology by any stretch of the imagination. Did he deserve an apology? But the Lord humbled me, and he said, you have no right to say those things about that man. He is your boss. Therefore, I put him, above you. So now, because you have never been in his position, you need to go apologize. And I was like, Lord, that man doesn't. Yeah, but you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for me because you are me. And I did, and that changed his whole mindset. But that also changed mine, because what I realized was, this isn't about me. This is about who I represent, and overall the department I represent. And like you had said before, this is going to pay dividends for many other officers after this with administration. Now, I'm one person, but so the salty dogs, did you find some of that? Like some of the guys that were the saltiest became like, okay, I can handle this. Did you find that?
In fact, I had one of the commanders saying, "Hey, I worked for the other sheriff and I could do the job," but he said, what you're asking me to do is the way I've always wanted to be able to do it. That's a 20-year guy.
Yeah. And to be brutally honest, I didn't get into administration simply because of the fact I didn't want to become like the rest of the administrators.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? I thought, that's what I told you on the outset. I'd been in patrol for 10 and a half years before, and I'd been told I wasn't qualified to be, I didn't pass high enough on sergeant's tests. And, and I remember finally I got convicted of this, that, Matt, maybe you're not supposed to be a sergeant because you actually like cops. And it seemed to me most of the sergeants seemed irritated at cops. And I thought, well, wait a minute, how can you get irritated? You're letting them take keys to what, a $70,000 car,
Yeah.
computers, shotgun, rifle, all the different equipment, and you're giving them the keys to all of those things and sending them out on their own.
Yeah.
But you don't treat them you can trust them with that, but you can't trust them with small things. You've got it upside down. And
Yeah.
so I thought, if I can't trust them on this, I have to trust them on the small things if I can trust them on the big things. And the folks that were, and I remember thinking as a boss that when the Lord finally did grant me that position as a supervisor, then I was supervising patrol officers. And I was an advocate for them because I thought these are good people who deserve a good boss.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of abuse from the people above me
I bet you
for
did.
it.
I
But
bet you did.
I knew, like I said, these are good people. They deserve a good boss. And I don't know that I can break the cycle, but I can break it. And if they become supervisors someday, perhaps they'll do the same.
And I
And
guess
so,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead,
I
Heather.
guess I did rather than becoming a supervisor, I would try to be that patrolman, the senior patrolman who would take some guys aside after a call, after I seen something that I'm thinking, man, this dude's
Mm-hmm.
going to get himself killed, and I would calmly say to him,
Yeah,
"Hey, why don't you try this?" Or, "Hey, I've been around a
yeah,
while,"
yeah,
and
yeah.
and I would serve that way. And I also got on my union board, so I could advocate for our
Mm-hmm.
guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think that's just huge. We are seeing today like every industry across the board, and you and I came in at a time, at least I did. I remember there was probably 2,500 people applying to get a job for 5 to 10 spots, right, on a police
Mm-hmm.
department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you're lucky to get 50 applicants, 200 applicants. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think is the state of policing now? I know this is in Bloomington and a few other police departments up by you that this is put into practice. What are they finding with their recruitment? Is their recruitment higher than like yours was at the time, or are they still struggling even with these principles put into place? What have you found with that?
Yeah. It's really remarkable, and has been overstaffed
Wow.
for the last. It probably going on 4 years. All
When did
right,
they put
3
these
years
principles
anyway.
into place? 4 years?
Well, let's see. It would have been 2022.
Okay.
That they started to implement this 20, and then really went live with it in 2023. So since that
Wow.
time, they are at staff or slightly overstaffed. The only one, maybe it's caught up, but for the longest time, that was the only one in the state, and they had people waiting to get in the door. All right, so
Wow.
word was getting out, and there was no huge. Once again, it was the same phenomenon that had occurred at Ramsey County. Now I've started work with Metro Transit in the Twin Cities, and their experience. I've been active with them now for about. And again, this isn't me. This is not my project. This is me conveying and helping chiefs get the information that they need, and then they know their departments best, and they do the implementation. So it's. I don't want to say that this is my idea. It's a
Mm,
process,
mm,
and they could do it, but they don't have experience doing it. So they want me to come in and help them. So I think I mentioned this on the phone. My focus is I'll give you a fish while I teach you to fish,
mm.
right? So
Right.
so the idea is I'm not looking for permanent work at any of these places. My objective is there's another group of leaders coming up, and I really do believe my responsibility is to hold the ladder for those next character-based leaders. And one of the ways that I can do this is to come alongside them on in this particular area. And if this is what they want, because what it does is it allows them to keep their head in the game and focused on what it takes to administer their organization and work systematically with people in their organization to get the other elements of this in place. And you don't try to do it with one splash, you do it incrementally over a period of time. And so that's the other part. So it really doesn't feel like big change. Um, but here's the other part is it takes a determination from the chief to be consistent, and
Mm.
that they're using and they're modeling what it is that they're doing, and they're unwavering in that. And the other part that comes from this is that if you're honoring, and you got to honor community members that demonstrate honesty, respect, and service, and you need to be honoring publicly your officers when they demonstrate honesty, respect, and service.
Yep.
You need to do both sides of that as a chief, and they're doing those things. And so we're seeing the same phenomenon at both of those places. And I'm going to go back to something. When I came on the job, when I took the test in St. Paul, there were over 2,100 people that signed up for that exam. And I took it for experiential purposes. I didn't expect to be hired. I was only 20 years old at the time anyway. I couldn't even have been hired. They would have put me in the queue. But anyway, another indicator coming through that and being 21, class member 21, my rank was 21, and it started out with 2,100 people. I mean, the odds, that's the Lord saying, this is where I need you to be.
Yeah.
So anyway, with that in mind, here's what I've seen over and over and over is that background investigators will come back to the chief during the employment on-ramping process at a department, right? They've looked at the application, they've done some interviews, they've done all the stuff that they do, reviewing apps and interviews and all that. And now the backgrounders start. And so there'll be, let's say you're going to hire 10. There'll be 8 of them that they say, you know what, these are pretty solid. But the rest of this group, boss, I'm telling you, I really don't know. There's these guys, no way. And I don't think we should take any of them. Well, what bosses then do, here, every chief I've worked with has said this. Well, the council gave it and the mayor gave us money. We got to fill those seats or they're going to take them away. That is the worst decision I've ever seen in my life. But they do it across the United States. Chiefs feel pressure because then hey, if you can't fill the seats, we're taking your money away. Here's the problem. When you fill those seats with those 2 people, whoever they are, they're never going to be above C average people. They will use all their sick time. They will be the ones most likely to be injured on duty. They will create the bulk of your internal affairs complaints. They will get in the most squad accidents. And they will also be the ones that your internal affairs office has to get, they're always getting in time. There was an officer here and he said this, or he didn't do this, or he did whatever it was. They're just an absolute drain on the department. And I said, when you do that, you have intentionally hired a 25-year rock in your organizational shoe. Who wants to run a marathon with a rock in their shoe? But chiefs and sheriffs do that. And so back to that point is think about this, Brian, and if there's any other cops that are listening, think about the nights you went into patrol and you were short, but you did have a solid group. Mm-hmm. I look back on those nights as some of the best nights in patrol that I've ever had. That was the A team. Now, I'm not saying that you can operate like that all the time, right? But you can operate short with your best people. Performance improves, morale improves, but it's not sustainable. You got to eventually give those guys some relief. But that wouldn't have happened because when you're fully staffed, let's say you got 2 guys from the clown club that somehow got on the department and they're milking calls. Well, they're not there anyway. So you're still the same guys running around, and you've got 2 guys that aren't getting it done, right? Yep.
So guy ain't gonna be around anyway.
And it all goes back to this fear that because hey, of those 2,500 people that used to sign up, you still had people like I don't know. There's the over 2,400 of them you weren't going to look at anyway because they were just doing it like a lottery ticket. These people aren't going to get hired as cops. They shouldn't, right? There's some people that should be policed, and there's some people that should be policed.
I call them the come and the called. I honestly believe there's the come and the called. Yeah. The ones who come to policing and have no business being there, they last 3 to 5 years and they're out. As a matter of fact, I used to tell kids all the time, I say kids because they're a lot younger than me a lot of times. I'd say, look, here's what I will tell you. You give yourself about 5 years, 7 years, you'll really start to know this gig, right? You'll feel it. But if you get to that 5 to 7 year point and you're dreading life and this sucks for you and you don't want to do it, this is the time to go. And there's nothing wrong with that. And and I used to tell these kids, there's nothing wrong with that. And you would never hear that nowadays because we're short. Don't tell them that. Don't tell them that. You're scared. I talked to a gentleman or a wife of a gentleman. He's 41 years old. He's going to be starting at a small town. He just got out of the military. He told his wife he's going to an academy. He said there's an academy class of about 50 50, 51 guys. He said there's probably 15 of those guys that have no business becoming cops.
Right.
And he
Right.
says, and what I'm afraid of is no one's going to tell their departments that, because here they already are. And I think it goes back to, it's exactly the point that you're making. And I think we're seeing that even more now because they're so desperate for people that if you just breathe hot air, you can get hired. And I think your concept and what you're doing would be huge if these guys would adopt that, because the state of policing right now, because let's face it, what bleeds leads, right? I mean, and so with cops, you see these shootings with ICE, and you and I can both, that'd be a whole nother show. But when I see all of these things that are happening in policing, I think to myself, who are hiring these people? And then I talk to guys who are doing background checks, and they're telling me some of the things that are that they're letting pass. I'm like, I thank God I'm not in policing anymore. I wouldn't want that dude on the road with me.
Right.
Is there a difference, have you found, between chiefs of police who do this and sheriffs who do this? Because I always say chiefs of police are the puppets of the mayors. They really are. Your mayor is going to set the tone most of the time, at least in a lot of places that I'm at, will set the tone for the chief of police. And a chief of, I've been told by many chiefs of police, my hands are tied because of that guy. And what have you found with this system with chiefs and sheriffs?
Yeah, so chiefs, in larger cities, it's the mayor. Medium and smaller cities, it's probably the city manager, which you could say is the mayor and council, but that's generally that's who their audience is. Sheriffs, it's a spectrum. You have some sheriffs who are there that are, well, they like the limelight. They like being the leader of an organization, and they're politicians. They got into it. Okay, so they're going to do what is popular, right? They're populists. That's what they're going to do. And so, so I don't necessarily have a pattern other than to know those are the conditions. Those are the differences between kind of the two executives.
So let me give you an example. Speak to a chief of police who may listen to this podcast, who thinks what he hears, and I'm going to put a link to your website and whatever information you want me to give them, I will link it in there. But talk to that guy or gal who is a chief of police who wants to bring this to their mayor. How should they go about pursuing this, especially if they know they got a populace that they're working for? How are they gonna handle this?
Well, I'd give you at least two things to go on this. Actually, there's probably three things that I've seen happen repeatedly. So let's take it first from the personnel standpoint, and then take it from the financial standpoint. So, all right, so when you involve the community, there's something that I tell community members in these focus groups as we wrap these up. So what I do is we do a focus group. I get all the information. Then I take that information, I go to cops, and I said, hey, here's what the community says makes a good cop, trustworthy cop. What do you think about this? Did they leave anything out? Is there something that you disagree with? Let's get this right. And then I take what they've agreed to and I bring it back to those community members. And I say, hey, thank you for your input. I wanted to let you know we heard you. This is what I did with it. Here's how the officers responded to what you gave us. Now, what's interesting is in every case, the officers have never said delete what the community said on any line. What the cops have done is actually strengthened it. They've added to the list of what makes a trustworthy cop. They've made it even tighter than what the community had asked for. All right. So the community is like, wow, that's great. We love it. That's a great addition. Okay. Now, this is what I say, is I said, if I'm at it, it doesn't matter the department, who's ever leading it, whether it's Caucasian or not male, female, whatever. Right. I say, that, and I look at their chief and I say, your chief can stand at the front door and say that people with character and from the community are welcome here. But the only time they're going to actually come through that doorway is because somebody that they trusted told them they'd make a good officer and this would be a good place for them to work. And I said, and if you haven't done that, and I'm the gray-haired guy. I can get away with this now. I said, if you haven't done this in your own household with your family, if your relatives haven't done this at a family picnic, if there's been a community picnic and it's not been that way and it hasn't been resident in your schools or your churches, and yet you're demanding the chief to hire from your community, and the kids in your community have never heard that you'd be proud of them if they worked there. If you're not doing it, is it your neighbors that's doing that? And if your neighbors aren't doing it, where's the chief supposed to get these people? Well, when I say that, they're all looking at their shoelaces, because I'm not doing that to convict them. It's to prompt them to say, don't blame the chief for recruitment. They can establish a wonderful place to work, but the only way people will come is if they know their family would be proud of them if they worked there. Okay. So here's what happens. The community started to recruit in all of these places. That's what changed. Wow. They actually took me up on that and went out and started sending me people. Okay. And then, so that's where part of the engine started. The other part is I would ask on the annual performance appraisal to the deputies, I'd say, give us one name of person that you know that you think would make a good deputy. Well, not everybody had one, but a lot of people did. All right, so that's another way you get in the door. You think about how many cops and deputies got there because they had a friend that said, I think you'd do a really good job and this is a good place. Two things simultaneously happened. Deputies were given names and corrections officers were given names that they thought would make good employees. So all of a sudden we have a pool of people that are already been recommended. They didn't self-deploy. Okay. So now my list, I have a lot of people, so I can post a test, but I've already got some solid candidates. And again, maybe I'm only hiring 10 or 12 people. Well, okay. So it changes your pool. Now, so that's the twofold ways that you go at doing it in a department. Okay. And then, because ultimately when you look at cops, if you interview them, how did you end up here? Randomly because you went to a career fair? No. It's because there was some connection with that department. Correct. Something, right? Correct. So I don't say go ahead and do career fairs. I don't care. That's fine. I shouldn't say I care, but don't assume that's going to help you with recruitment. Everybody does that. So it's good advertising, but that's not where you're going to get your people. Now when I go to the mayor and city manager, now you tell them these things. When you hire this way and you do backgrounds where you're looking for character in their backgrounds. I mean, not just integrity. We look for integrity in backgrounds, but actually really tailor it so you're looking for respect and service in there too. When you do all of those things, the attrition rate in the first year is between 5 and 6% at the departments that have done this. From the time that they were offered a job to the time that they made it through probation. Most departments, especially large departments, that number is 20 to 25% or higher. They just know they're going to wash people out. So what does that do to your training staff, knowing that 20% of the people here aren't going to make it, and I'm training people that I know good and well, and nobody listened to me again, but we hired them anyway. They get to FTO. FTO is like, how in the world did this guy get through the academy? Yep. And then how much work is that? So you're burning out your FTOs at a 20 to 25% higher rate. Think about that. You don't have to hire as many rounds because you don't have as many vacancies. You don't have as many, so your training, it drops your hiring processes substantial. Everything drops 20%, 1/5 of all the effort you have to put in. Wow. And I would say not even that, because when you have a difficult employee in the academy and you're on performance improvement plans and everything else, how much work is that? Yeah. So it's not just, it's those 20% that are going to get washed out anyway. They're just sucking the life out of your training staff and your FTOs. And by the way, they aren't impressing anybody in the community. You're doing damage control because of the way they said something or didn't say something or made an excuse for whatever it was. But like you said, you take somebody off to the side and say, hey, there's probably a better way to do this. Well, anyway, so that's, if I was to say it, I'm losing my voice here a little bit. I guess we've been at this for a while, haven't we? So probably have to do this in a couple chunks. But that's what I say. So this is what I say to chiefs. I can say all three things to chiefs, but the chiefs, if they really want to get the mayor's attention, it's you tell them about lawsuits, sick time, attrition rates, and all of those things. And all of a sudden they're like, well, chief, if that's what you want to do and it's going to save money, and how much would it cost to have a temporary consultant to come in to get that aligned? They can get the green light to do it. So
That is amazing. And yeah, and it all comes down to the bottom line is the biblical principles, right? To
mhm.
model yourself essentially after Christ, those Christ-like principles, that principle that um, the man in the Bible who the Lord just pointed out and said, because of this centurion, just
Mhm.
watch that. If you just
Mhm.
model that is amazing. Matt, it has been uh, an absolute pleasure to interview you, to listen to your ideals, and I seriously believe that if departments across this country, you could very well have part of a solution to a problem that we're having right now in policing, and that is, um, I can't tell you how many different cops always tell me I would never tell my kid to get in. I would never tell anybody's kid to get it right. I mean, I hear that more often than not than I ever had before. I mean, shoot, I wouldn't have become a cop in this day and age if people would have been talking the way they were, way back when.
Mhm.
But I had a drive to do it, so maybe I would have done it anyway. But I think to get to the come and the called, I think you're exactly right. And the very fact that a community would send people to apply speaks volumes because you've given them voice. They're heard,
Mhm.
and now it's one of
Mhm.
theirs that are in there. And you did it without having to do it artificially to simply hire the guy because he looks like the community. And I think
Right.
what you have found, and correct me if I'm wrong, officers are recruiting. Suddenly your pool is no longer you're grabbing this guy from this county and this guy from this county. You're getting hometown guys
Yeah.
right from the communities that you're in. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it
Absolutely.
only
Yep.
makes sense because you have included your community. Man, I think it's fascinating. You and I could talk about a multitude of topics. I'm probably going to do a part one, part two in this particular interview. Um, Give me one or two last nuggets that you want to imply to those leaders out there who are struggling to just get a hold of. Maybe they can't convince this mayor. Maybe as a sheriff, they're looking um, for that solution. Give them some hope. Give them a couple
Okay.
nuggets of hope.
Yeah. Let's see if I can. One is I say thank you for pursuing it. Thank you for the ideals with which they're serving. Right. Don't give up on those. Mike, I said as a boss, your good employees need a good boss. So be the best chief, be the best sheriff that you can. It matters. It matters to those people, regardless of resistance you get at City Hall or the county courthouse. I want to be encouragement to them. Two is that what I'm describing doesn't mean you change your processes. I didn't add a single extra process in what I've talked about. What we have, what I do help departments do, is to calibrate those processes. So, what questions do you ask on an application to start to discern and make that case that that person coming on has the character the community and the cops want, right? So ultimately, when you offer them a job, there should be enough evidence to convict them of being a person of character. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then, so that's the part I tell them. This isn't about changing all your processes. What I do is I take what is because let's take backgrounds. Um, a backgrounder is asking all sorts of things related to integrity, and well, it doesn't say the word integrity in there except maybe once in a preamble. You should be identifying which parts of these and tell the people straight out. This background focuses on your honesty, respectfulness, and service. And then you go through and those questions actually draw those out. So there isn't any, and it's no extra work for the backgrounders because it's the applicant that has to fill all that information in. So again, that's the types of things that, and then I do the same with FTO or with training. That if you're doing a training class, what core value does this training class have anything to do with? Well, it has to do with all three. This is about honesty, respect, and service. All right, that's why we're doing this training today, and we're going to do it this way. You don't have to spend hours on it, but the point is, that's the stuff I help you do, is to take the things that might be there embedded that you hope they come away with, and for me to make them overt, right? Make sure that so what does that mean? Doesn't take me a tremendous amount of work to do it. I know how to do it. And I don't charge much. But here's what it is for a chief. It's not about money, it's about intentionality. It's about, and that's really what this is. It's about, if you do this, once you commit to it, and then incrementally just continue to add each aspect of your department's organization into this, it all of a sudden an engine starts. And I'd say it this way, the old days, people have electric starts on lawnmowers, but you might remember when you had to actually pull them, prime them, and pull them, right? Well, that first few pulls, that flywheel is barely spinning, but once it fires, you really don't have to do much, and it doesn't use much energy. Right. And so that's my job, is to help chiefs get that flywheel going, so that once it's going, people will look at that department and say, Chief, you have an amazing department. Why, look at how great it is. Well, what they didn't see is what happened at the beginning to get that started, and that's my job, is to get the flywheel going. So again, doesn't cost much. It doesn't require changing all of your programming or adding layers. It means just being really clear about why we're doing what we're doing, and that's where I try to, like I said, I try to be the staff member I wish I could have had on my department. But that's so long swerving answer to say, this doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes about being intentional and understanding. And let's go back to what you opened with. This is about purpose, Brian. And when you're doing something with a purpose, you do it with intention. And there is a way to do this. And you don't have to recreate the wheel. We can take all the things we're doing as cops and refine them, calibrate them like a rifle, right? Let's get that sight in so that we hit the center of that target. And if you center that, if you take all of your processes and you target in on honesty, respect, and service, lo and behold, that's what starts to happen inside the organization on big and small issues. And the community then implicitly feels it.
For those who are listening on the podcast and not watching the YouTube where they'll see my link, where can they get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of this information? Mm-hmm. What do they have to do?
Easiest way to contact me is through my website, and that is centerforvalues.com. And otherwise, email me directly, matt@centerforvalues.com. Easiest way to get a hold of me, either one of those, no problem. That email would come directly to me. Actually, it would come right here. All right, so until I get inundated and have to hire staff, I will take everybody's emails related to these things, because I feel that this is my responsibility, is that, in a way, what kind of person sits on good news? But the other part too is, if people aren't ready to do it, I can't force them to do it either. So I just remain available to come alongside and help as people feel called that this is the time for them. I'm happy to do it. It again gives me purpose. So I'm happy to do it.
Well, I thank you, Matt, for taking the time to come on my podcast, for having just met me, never had seen me before, talked to me one time on the phone. It's an honor and a privilege that you would even do that for me, but we both know it's because we serve a mighty God who has laid this all out long before you and I were even thought of. Yeah. And I think the purpose that you have and the reason you want to do it will speak to a lot of people's heart out there. Those of you who have been listening to this program for a while, I hope this has fed into you. I hope it is giving you some hope. And I really would pray that you take up Matt on his offer to you. And those of you who are Christian leaders out there, just know that the Lord has called you for such a time as this. And you might have felt a stirring in your heart as you listen to Matt talk, and that spirit of the Lord that's within all of us is speaking to you at this time. So don't let the enemy talk you out of what you believe your mayor would say or what your people would say. You go with what you know the Lord has laid on your heart. And I would challenge you to just send Matt an email to inquire and watch what happens. What does the Bible say? Come taste and see what the Lord has. And for those who are his children and serve him, we know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, these kind of meetings and these kind of things happen always for a purpose and always for his glory. And the Bible does say for our good. So I thank you again, Matt, for coming on this program on Ministry of the Badge. It touched everything about my program. It's an amazing thing. And you folks, stay tuned. You're probably going to get this in 2 parts, but it's well worth listening to. And I'll have everything from Matt down below. Thanks again, Matt. Thank you, Ministry of the Badge, folks out there. I'll see you on the next one.
For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. You've been listening to Ministry of the Badge.